So you may know the state bird, which is the cardinal, but do you know the state frog? Did you even know we had one? Well, you will soon see it on the back of vehicles.
It's a great way to get the public's attention about something that's very, very important.
Governor Mike DeWine signed Senate Bill 163 today, creating 33 specialty plates. As 10 TV's Angela Reichert reports tonight, one of those plates was an idea years in the making.
The legislature knows it by that name, but what do you know that bill as?
Well, that would be the bullfrog license plate bill.
For 18 years,
Students came and students went.
Grizel Middle School teacher Sean Kaiser has worked on a, well, riveting project.
I would have never thought when I first started teaching 26 years ago that I would be this into the bullfrog.
Yeah, you heard that right. Let's rewind to 2002.
So the test is probably going to be on Tuesday now.
The 8th grade social studies teacher wanted to teach his students a lesson in both politics and science using this little guy.
His name is Bullfrog. For us trying to pass the bill.
The goal? To make the bullfrog a state symbol.
Why the bullfrog?
You know, I get that question a lot. So if you're going to make an animal a state symbol, it has to have really good name recognition. It should be found in all 88 counties. The kids back in 2002 kind of boiled it down to the bullfrog or the toad, and we felt like the toad had a lot of baggage.
I think you're right.
They picked up the phone.
Calling to ask for Senator Gardner's support about Senate Bill 264.
And put pen to paper, hoping to persuade lawmakers. Then in 2010,
it was my pleasure to sign House Bill 393.
Governor Strickland signed the bill into law, making the bullfrog Ohio's state frog. Now, let's fast forward to 2020.
Today, I rise to bring Senate Bill 158 to the floor.
The bullfrog once again fit the bill. This time, though, the goal was to hop onto license plates.
Did you think your teacher was a little wacky when you first heard it?
So when we first heard it, I didn't really think it was like real. I actually have the letter right here.
Mr. Kaiser's class went to work.
I basically just said my name, that I was in 8th grade, and that I wanted to gain the Senate support for the bill.
And they got it.
And we have Mr. Kaiser and his social studies class tuning in today from Dublin.
So great, welcome.
The bill ended up on the governor's desk. He signed off on creating 33 specialty plates, including the bullfrog. Grizel Middle School art teacher Todd Arnold came up with the design.
I'm glad it got passed. I was thinking in my head, who would be against it really? It's an easy way to create awareness for the environment, do things for the environment, and start conversations around the state. Families might say, hey, do you see that bullfrog on that license plate? Why is that there? What's a wetland?
A lesson found within one.
Even if I can't vote, I can still write a letter and have some say in something.
And I can really appreciate it when I'm driving by and see someone's bullfrog on a license plate.
Proving some things are just worth the wait.
10 years down the line, they'll see these plates and be reminded of those things that we talked about in class. It kind of just is a lesson that never stops.
Reporting in Columbus, Angela Reichert, 10 TV News.
Now, it may be a bit before you can buy one of these. We're told the governor's office will have to get the artwork from the school, but when it's ready, a portion of the proceeds will go to wetland conservation and education.